I spent an entire week digging deep into Netanyahu's unprofessional decisions, which led to a change in how you see the world today.
Everybody knows it's not going to happen.
I've never seen a foreign leader speak to the president like that.
Outrageous. Outrageous.
Palestinians were fed up, so everything unravels.
And boom, it explodes.
And I bet you're going to rethink your life choices in the next 10 minutes. Now, I'm going to start up with what the Independent Investigation Committee stated about what exactly happened on October 7th, and that's what is no one talking about. At around 6:29 a.m. October 7th, Netanyahu received a message from his secret military secretary, probably from Mossad, that attacks happening. Now, the attack itself was a false flag, though his first question right after 15 minutes was, "Can we kill Hamas's leadership right now?" Not, "How did we miss this?" Not, "Who screwed up?" Just, "Can we hit back?" And that reacting first and never asking questions instinct ends up defining basically everything that comes after. Now, while looking, I found a strange interview of a former spokesman of his, a guy named Eli Feldstein, who said something pretty wild. He says the very first task Netanyahu gave him within days of the attack wasn't about the hostages, also not about the dead. It was about, are the people and the internet still talking about responsibility, and can you make that go away? I mean, if that's true, that's not a guy in shock. That's a guy already doing damage control. And as far as my research took me, the Israeli people are not involved in this genocide, but the government of Netanyahu and their allies. And to shut the mouths of their people, Israel actually has a tool for this exact situation. It's called a State Commission of Inquiry with independent judges, real subpoena power, and no involvement of politicians. They used it back in 1973 after the Yom Kippur War to force the prime minister at the time to resign, and it somehow worked. Most Israelis, if you look at the polling, want that same thing now. But the evil Netanyahu regime doesn't want that to happen, and for 2 years he's blocked it, pushing instead for a government-picked committee, where, surprisingly, he gets more say over who's picking. Even Israel's own Attorney General looked at that alternative and basically said it's broken by design, built in a way that makes it impossible to actually get to the truth. Now, sit with that for a second. The guy under investigation, the great butcher, gets a hand in choosing his own investigators. Now, a big wow to the Israeli lawmakers. Now, after he's in full confidence, he eventually did wrote something down. A 55-page response to the state comptroller laying out his version of that morning. And the pattern shows up again. Most of it blames stuff from decades earlier. The pullout from Lebanon, the 2005 Gaza withdrawal, decisions other governments made, decisions he himself voted for at the time, even though he now says he was against them. Now, here's where it gets personal. Because the harshest pushback isn't coming from the opposition, it's coming from his own former defense minister, a guy he fired in the middle of the war, Yoav Gallant, who says he's the one who gave the order at 9 a.m. to call up the entire reserve army, which was the single biggest military decision of that whole day. When your own former defense minister, a guy who was standing next to you during the worst hours of the war, is publicly calling you out, that's not politics. That's someone who was in the room. And when a reporter asks him directly why he hasn't taken responsibility, his answer is basically, I answer to the public every day. We're at war. You want elections right now? That's not an answer. That's a dodge. And dodge, deflect, survive, that's the theme of the last 2 years.
On November 21st, 2024, judges at the International Criminal Court in The Hague issued an actual arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Not a statement, not a condemnation, a legal warrant. The same category of document used against war criminals and dictators. The main charges for the warrant were crimes against humanity and war crimes allegedly committed from at least October 8, 2023 until at least May 20, 2024. Specifically, the war crimes of using starvation as a method of warfare and directing attacks against the civilian population, plus crimes against humanity including murder and persecution. Basically, the court said there were reasonable grounds to believe he'd used the denial of food, water, and medicine to Gaza's population as a weapon of war, not a byproduct of it.
Israel doesn't recognize the ICC's jurisdiction here and rejects the warrant outright, which means Netanyahu isn't going anywhere. But functionally, it means over 100 countries that are members of the court are now legally obligated to arrest him the moment he sets foot on their soil. Sitting prime ministers just don't usually end up with their name on a document like that. And that's the part that's almost more damning than anything happening inside Israel. It's not just his own former defense minister calling him out anymore. It's a war crimes court. Here's the part that made me want to make this video instead of another one about the war itself. But before that, we have to reach 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year. So your each subscribe means a lot to us. Now this part has nothing to do with maps or generals. It's for me and you. When the war knocked the Strait of Hormuz offline for a stretch and rattled oil and gas production across the Gulf, energy prices didn't just tick up, they spiked, with Brent crude climbing past $100 a barrel and global energy costs jumping something like 24% in a matter of months, the sharpest jump in 4 years. And that pain doesn't stay in the oil markets. It leaks into everything. Shipping costs, fertilizer, plastics, food. So US inflation, which was already sitting stubbornly high, and in a lot of developing countries it climbed even further. Here's why that's so disorienting for a regular person. You don't experience a geopolitical energy shock in the Persian Gulf. You experience your grocery bill going up, gas costing more every week, your landlord raising rent, and the Fed suddenly deciding to hold off on interest rate cuts you were counting on. Nobody hands you the chain of causation. A war 8 time zones away, to an oil choke point, to a shipping cost, to a price tag. So it just feels like the economy randomly got worse, for reasons nobody in charge is explaining to you in plain language. That gap between the actual cause and what people are told is exactly why inflation always ends up feeling less like economics and more like a personal failure. So the real question hanging over Israel right now is, can that happen again? Or has the last 2 years shown that some failures are just too big, too economically or politically dangerous for the people responsible to ever let anyone actually dig into them? Now, to be fair, because you should always hear the other side before you decide, Netanyahu's camp doesn't see any of this the way I just laid it out. Their argument is that October 7th was a systemic failure. Military, intelligence, border command, all of it. Not something you can pin on one office. They say a politically appointed inquiry, the kind the opposition's pushing for, risks turning into a circus, relitigating fights from decades ago about Gaza or Oslo, instead of fixing what actually broke. And they point to that same 55-page document as proof he was engaged within minutes, asking about reserves, asking about hostages, asking about taking out Hamas leadership. Not frozen, not absent. Whether that holds up is something reasonable people are going to disagree on, which is kind of the whole point. An independent inquiry, one neither side gets to shape ahead of time, and that's the only real way anyone finds out. That's the story nobody's telling you.